Good evening. I'm a psychologist, and as a psychologist, my main job is to help people. I work with children, adolescents, and adults who have a variety of problems, such as physical problems, anxiety, depression, social problems. And I have met a lot of people who have experienced trauma and who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Being a psychologist means finding a connection to another person and trying to find solutions together. But sometimes this doesn't work very well. Some patients don't want to talk about their problems. Some children don't want to go to therapy. We know from research that only about 3 to 30% of children and adolescents with mental health problems receive therapy. And in addition to the lack of accessibility, some of the most important barriers are fear of negative interaction with the therapist and lack of trust in the therapist, as Pfeiffer and Inalbon just recently showed. But even when children do attend therapy, 20 up to 75% drop out or do not respond to treatment. And this is often due to the problems in the therapeutic relationship. And we know that alliance is key for therapeutic success. So, how do we deal with that? Let me take you back to the time I was still very young. In primary school, we had some classmates who were refugees. They came to Switzerland, where I lived, without speaking a word of German. And I tried to make friends with one of the boys. I took him to my home and showed him around. And I quickly noticed that he was very interested in my guinea pigs. So we started to play with them. I showed him how to feed them. And clearly, the animals helped me to build a relationship with this boy. And from that period on, I was very determined to use this experience in some way later in my life. And I did. Today, animals play an important role in my work. But people are usually confused when they hear that I work with animals, whether it is in the scientific world, at the universities, or in clinical practice. But it actually makes a lot of sense, because we humans have been living together with non-human animals for so long. And more than that, we are animals. Here you see a cave painting from Lascaux in France. And this is the cat goddess Bastet in ancient Egypt. Humans have hunted animals, worshipped them, we domesticated them, used them for protection and for food. But today we have banned animals that we eat out of our sight. But let's not forget that people still live closely with other animals, but now for comfort, for emotional and social support. And you may be remembering these images from the start of the war in Ukraine. So many people fleeing together with their dogs and their cats. Well, we know from research that animals actually are perceived as family members, and that people can form attachments to pets similar to those between children and parents. And that brings me to the role of animals in therapy. Because you may still be wondering, well, what role really plays the animal in my work? You remember my experience with the refugee boy. Having studied psychology, when I was in training to become a psychotherapist very early in my career, I thought, well, a human talking to another human couldn't be the only way how to address problems in psychotherapy. I began to integrate animals into my work with clients and to do research about this subject. I was fascinated to learn a new way of doing psychotherapy that was very different from the familiar old one. And to this day, this keeps me fresh and young in the mind. Because when we bring an animal into therapy, we do not only have complex people, but we also have a complex animal with a mind of its own. Having an animal in therapy suddenly means it's just not only me and the patient, but there's a triangle. There's the patient, the animal, and me, the therapist. And this means that I have to take the responsibility for two living beings, and that I'm responsible for both of their well-being and their safety. So this triangle, it adds a lot more layers of relationships. And as complex as they can be, they offer a huge opportunity. For example, it gives me the opportunity to observe how my patient interacts with an animal. Is she shy and considerate? Can she respect the boundaries of the animal? Or is she impetuous and hugs the dog without realizing that the dog doesn't want to be hugged? Or what happens if the dog walks away or doesn't obey my patient's commands? Well, that all gives me a lot of important diagnostic information. And another layer is represented by the fact that the patient can also observe the relationship between me and the animal. Let me illustrate this with one of my most powerful personal experiences. A few years ago, a boy came to see me who had stopped going to school, and he refused therapy in the clinic. No one knew what to do with him. In my classical practice, I see my patients in a room just like this with 4 walls. But this boy was registered for horse-assisted therapy. So when his mother brought him to the center, I was outside the barn brushing a mare. And I saw that this boy was fascinated by this horse and very interested. So I began talking to him, explaining to him and his mother who this horse was, how she lived, and how I took care of her together with the children who visit me once a week. The boy didn't look me in the eye. He didn't answer any of my questions. And when I asked him what he feels, he just froze. I then shifted his focus back to the horse, and he became engaged again. And when I asked him if he wanted to help me take care of the horse and what he thinks the horse might actually feel, something extraordinary happened. He started to briefly answer my question. And after this first encounter, he even agreed to come back to the stable next week. So over the next few weeks, we worked together with this horse. He was not able to build a relationship with me, but with his horse. He often made very aggressive comments to me, trying to get me to dislike him. But the horse then, of course, she reacted to his body language, and his body language told a very different story. He was tender and very interested, devoted to the mare, and wanted to learn everything about her. And she reacted to that and not to his verbal comments. So in the next few weeks, I carefully showed the boy how I took care of this horse, how I brushed her, how I fed her, how I walked her, and I let him do the same. I explained him when she needed a rest and how I protected her, and he closely observed this relationship. And then, at some point, he decided that I was a person worth trusting to engage in a therapeutic relationship. He opened up and started to tell me about his experiences of massive violence at home. So far, the only people he had trusted were the ones who hurt him. I'm quite sure that this horse was my only chance to get in contact with this boy. By letting him observe a caring relationship without the need and the danger of engaging in one himself. In the scientific literature, this is why Corson and Corson in 1981 already told that animals can act as a social lubricant and a social catalyst. But in addition to that, the horse allowed the boy to change roles from being a boy in need of care to being a caregiver himself, giving him self-esteem by fulfilling a very deep human need. But it's not just about horses. Animal-assisted psychotherapy can be done in different contexts and with a lot of different animals. I have set up an institute in Basel, Switzerland, together with some friends at a farm where we work with children in nature and with different animals, such as chicken. Chicken are a very good example of group dynamic. There's a rooster who takes care of all his hens, but they have also very clear hierarchy. One of our chicken, for example, is often not allowed to eat with the other chickens. And that leads to a lot of topics we can discuss in therapy with the patient. Moreover, chickens are highly intelligent. They can learn to do a lot of tricks, such as doing a parkour. And patients can learn and train emotion regulation skills because chickens are highly sensitive to impulsive behavior. Or with rabbits. With rabbits, it is about caring for a fragile creature and about accepting boundaries. Because the rabbits, they're always free to choose whether or not they want physical contact with the children, which means the children have to learn to be patient and to wait. And often it is also about tolerance of frustration because the rabbit has other plans than the patient, and that is okay. So, how do we choose the right species? Well, if I'm working with aggressive adolescents, choosing a horse might be a better option than a small rabbit, right? The therapeutic goal, of course, influences the choice. But most importantly, it's the patient who says with whom he or she wants to work with. Because it has to fit. The relationship with the animal and the patient is key. And sometimes it's even the animal who chooses the patient. I remember a woman. She wanted to work with sheep because she grew up on a farm where they had sheep. And then suddenly Moritz, the cat, came, jumped on her lap and refused to leave her. He chose her. And she was so touched by that she then formed a very strong relationship with Moritz. As different as these animals may be, they all have in common that they don't speak with words. They don't judge. They don't care if you are successful at school or at work or if you look different than others. and contact with them can lead to physical effects such as lowering stress hormones and releasing oxytocin. But it cannot only be helpful for the patient, but also for me. And why does it really work? Meta-analyses have shown that animal-assisted therapy has shown large effect size in reducing anxiety, pain, and stress in patients with medical problems. It can also reduce problematic behavior in patients with dementia and increase social behavior, communication, and adaptive functioning in patients with autism. And in a meta-analysis that we have been doing ourselves, we could even show that animal-assisted therapy leads to the same effects as standard trauma therapy in patients with post-traumatic stress disorder. So why could it be also helpful for me? Well, it keeps me young in the mind. A therapy session is never the same. Working with animals is a lot of fun because you have to be very flexible. Either the child or the animal does something you haven't planned. And I've even learned to be a better therapist because learning from the animals has made me better at listening to the children's nonverbal language. So, we know very well that social contact is important for people's health. Meta-analysis by researchers such as Holt Lundstedt, Naita or Wong and colleagues have shown that the likelihood of mortality is 25 to 30% higher if people are socially isolated, live alone, or feel lonely. Humans are social animals. We need other people to feel good. But we usually only see half of the picture here. It's not only people, but also animals that help us stay healthy, social, and young in the mind.